Jesus said during his ministry, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so, according to that spiritually, what you'll find is, there we go. What you'll find is, we're in James chapter 3, verse 1, talking about taming the tongue. Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so what we see there is the fact that you can stay around somebody and listen to them talk for a day or two, for a week or two, and really know in many ways their spiritual condition. That's not to say that, some people aren't able to hide where their spiritual condition really is. And it doesn't mean to say that we have to have every single word about church, every other word about Jesus. But it is to say that where our heart is going to be very present and very visible in everything we say. So we're going to be looking at James chapter 1 or chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, chapter 4, 11 and 12, and chapter 5 and verse 12. And so I grew up always hearing, and you probably did too, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And in a lot of ways, that's not true, is it? Because the words we hear as we grow up shape us. The words we hear every day in the home, they affect us, who we are, how we view life. The words you hear in a church building affect you. And even not just the doctrine, but the way in which the doctrine is presented. You've got some guys who just preach angry. You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes people are that way. And so words are very important. So our words define us as a Christian and who we are. So as we think about that, I want us to think about two jobs and the great responsibility, the huge responsibility that comes with it. In the news, maybe once a year, you're going to hear a news report about police brutality. Every policeman is carrying around life-threatening equipment, whether it's their gun, whether it's their taser, or whatever else it may be. There's a lot of life-threatening equipment that they carry around. They've got to be careful because it's necessary to have those weapons, but it's also important to know when and how to use them. A policeman can get himself in trouble really quick if he doesn't know how to control those things and use those things in a proper way. That's something which is important for them to understand and to notice. Another job, as I was sitting around trying to think this up, doctor, a physician, maybe even a nurse. They've got the good drugs, right? And they're able to prescribe whatever medicines there are, whether it be opioids or all sorts of other kinds of things. And so you've got a lot of those guys who are there. And they're able to do that, but there's a huge responsibility that comes with the use of that medication, isn't there? And the ability to write those scripts. And they can really save a person's life, and they can really cost a person's life, depending on how they prescribe, depending on how they diagnose. There's a lot of responsibility there. And so I wanted us to carry those two ideas about how a policeman, there's a huge responsibility on him. A doctor, there's a huge responsibility on him. And a Christian, there's a huge responsibility on you. Because the words that you say. Proverbs 18:21, the tongue holds the power of life and of death. You can bless someone's life, or you can drive them to the point of death. Just by a few single words that you might say. Proverbs 15, looking at verse 4 and 23, the tongue brings healing as the tree of life. In verse 23, how good is a timely word. Psalm 39:1, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin, David says, and I will watch my mouth as long as the wicked are in my presence. And so the tongue holds the power of life and of death. Now, as I was getting ready for this lesson, I was going through and thinking of important speeches I've heard. And I've spoken at a graduation ceremony, and I'm sure that you have attended them, whether it was when you were graduating or your kids were graduating, spouses graduating, friends are graduating. People always are full of themselves when they give the speech, aren't they? And nobody listens. You know, not a lot of people remember what was spoken at or what was talked about at your graduation speech. Now, sometimes they are memorable, but what are some major speeches that have shaped the world? What are some ideas you would have? I wrote down 10, but that's just because I'm nerdy. What's a big speech that changed the shape of the world? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Okay. 1983 in Berlin. Okay. I have a dream. Okay. 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. at the steps of the, Blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Winston Churchill. And I wrote down another one. It's the same speech, 1940. And we will fight on the beaches. We will fight in the houses. And I saw that one. John Kennedy. Some of us may be around remembering that. Who knows? 1961. Ask not what you can do for your country, but ask what? Wait. Yeah, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Okay, what you got? See, I wasn't there. All right.
Churchill, also in his old age, was at a commencement in
Yes.
Missouri, I think.
Here's somebody who remembers a commencement speech. Okay.
52, he sat down.
Yes, that's right. Never give up. We shall return. Douglas MacArthur. Yeah. Alvin Barkley. I would rather sit in the house of the Lord than sit in the house of the rich. Than sit in the seats of the mighty. That's absolutely right. That's a good local one. That's good. Lou Gehrig, 1939, dying of ALS at the age of 37. Had to retire, and you remember that speech? You don't remember it, but you've heard of it. I'm the luckiest man who's ever lived. I'm the luckiest man who's alive. Let's see, Gettysburg Address. Okay, is that what you're going to say? Okay, what you got? Give me liberty or give me death. That's Patrick Henry, right? Okay. This is what we don't know the words. Pope Urban in the Council of Clement. It's been said that under Christ you may free the land of Jerusalem, but he said it in a very flowery sense because it changed the history of the world. It caused all the fighting forces of France and of England, of Germany, to go down to Acre and go down to Jerusalem. And for those 2 centuries, the Crusades went on. In history, a lot of times we hear how terrible the Crusades were, but it really intermixed a lot of the learning and a lot of the language which happened in Europe for the coming centuries, and it also really changed a lot of what happened in the Middle East. And so it was one of those speeches that absolutely changed the world, for good or for ill. Diogenes, 341 AD. I know you weren't there for that one. Alexander the Great is coming down, conquering Greece, and the men are afraid, and he said, we can't even surrender. You haven't even got off your couch. You're not tired yet. And he went out and was promptly killed after saying that, but it was a good speech. Okay? So, what I want to bring out here is you can move people. If you are eloquent and you have that right moment, you will move people by the things that you say. Now, I've not been in the presence of these guys who are great orators, but I, like you, remember the words of my dad, and I, like you, remember the words, of your mother, and I've heard preachers, and preachers have shaped me in my style in preaching and study which I've done, and each one of us have been shaped by words, and each one of us are shaping other people by the words that we speak and by the things that we say and the way in which we live. And so that's why this James chapter 3, why we teach about it so often, why it's important for us to emphasize it again and really think it through. So James chapter 3, verse 1. Man, this one's tough to be a preacher, right? Let not many of you become teachers, because you know you'll receive a stricter judgment. In the first century, a lot of people like to be teachers. We see that over in 3 John, don't we? There's Diotrephes who love the preeminence. A lot of people in 2 John we're coming in, and John says, check out these preachers before they come. They want to live with you. They want to live off of you. They want the good salary and the respect which came with being a preacher in the first century. He said, but a lot of them are false teachers. Don't have fellowship with those false teachers. It's important for us to notice and recognize the power of words and the power of to whom we're listening. Now, you would think a sermon may not make that much of a difference. 25 minutes on a Sunday morning, 20 minutes on a Sunday night. You get about 30 minutes of me here. Hour and a half in a week, when you think of all your teachers, and you think of all your employees, that's not a lot. But a preacher in many ways shapes a congregation. And your Bible class teachers shape that class as they grow up. And so there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. And that's the point that he's making as he brings that out and goes through there. Here's a question I thought of. How many people do you know that are in heaven because of words that you've said? And how many people do you know that have been discouraged and left the faith because of words that you've said? Now, sometimes we affect people without even realizing it. You know, hey, that's my pew, get out of here. And they may say, oh, I'm never going back. And we'll never know it, right? Or maybe sometimes we say something we don't mean to and we offend somebody. If somebody listens to you, are you bringing them to heaven, or are you pushing them away by the way that you talk and where your emphasis and your thought is? That's a really important thing. Now, those words are just about too small, and I felt bad about it all day. I sent this to Danny yesterday, and I thought, you know, I'm not paying for paper here. I'm just paying for electricity. I should have split that in two, and I apologize. But if you got your Bibles, or if you can read that, let's start in verse 2, okay? For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn the whole body. Look at ships, although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires to go. All right, we'll just stop there at verse 4. What I find interesting here is studying the idea of a rudder on a boat. One thing you'll learn if you mess with boats very often is you don't make a quick turn. Some of the speedboats can make a quick turn, but most of these great, mighty boats have to determine that a turn's coming up because it takes a long time to move over in that direction. The Titanic saw that iceberg several minutes before it ever hit it. They were turning for all that they were worth, but because they were already headed in that direction with that momentum, they couldn't turn quickly enough. And I think that teaches us something about our words, because I'm good, and maybe you're good, at watching my words for a specific amount of time, right? I can behave for 10 minutes, maybe. I can behave for 30 minutes. But you know, it's like the boat. It's a constant, long-term effect that our words have. And so don't just think that one word's going to, make it good or bad, save you or make you lost. It's an accumulation of words which are going on. Horses weigh hundreds of pounds, well over 1,000 pounds, and yet you can control them with just that little bridle, just that little piece of metal. And what James is telling us here is this little tongue that you have can control your entire future and control your entire word and everything else. And so that's some important stuff for us to notice. Now, look here at verse 5. Even so, the tongue is a little member, boasts great things. See how great a forest fire a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, the world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members, it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell. All right, you're out in the woods, because it's beautiful weather right now to go camping. And you start a fire, and you haven't cleaned up around well enough, you're not using safe practices, and that fire begins to spread. Well, you can put out the fire that's right at your campground, but the larger the fire gets, the harder it is to stop the momentum right there, right? Let me tell you something that happens a lot of times in marriages, okay? Don't mean to be stereotypical, chauvinistic in any way about this, because it goes both ways. But a husband and wife have a fight. They're young, they're just married, they have a fight. The wife is so frustrated, she needs somebody to talk to, doesn't want to gossip, doesn't want to do any of that, so she goes and tells her mother. And she tells her mother about all these things that her husband did, how the husband is so aggravating, is so, just gets her so mad. And then she goes back home, and the husband apologizes to the wife, and they decide everything is good, everything is restored once again. Well, here in about 2 weeks, they go to the house for Thanksgiving, the mother-in-law's house for Thanksgiving, and there's a lot of hot sauce on whatever turkey that man's given. Because even though the wife is forgiven and the wife, they've gotten together, now we've got this on fire. And maybe she told this person, and now this is on fire. And maybe they told that person, and now this is on fire. And so sometimes if we wrong one person, but then that person goes and tells this person, and this person, and this person, and this person, you see how it's spreading like a fire? And now you've got to go fix this problem, fix that problem, fix that problem, and that problem, and it goes on and on and on. And that's how a lot of church problems will happen. Because you can't stomp out that fire. You can't fix it as it goes along. It doesn't work that way. And James says, be careful with your words, because maybe this fire is easy to put out, but as it keeps going and keeps going, oh man, that's even tougher as you go through. Now, his next illustration, next few verses. He says, imagine all the animals that you can tame. We tame all these crazy beasts. It's amazing seeing some of the things that people have been trained to do. I guess it's considered mean or, abusive to do now. But you remember back in the 70s and 80s and 90s maybe, where they would train these chimpanzees to do different things. And sometimes they'd even have them on television shows. And they look just like people because they've learned how to do certain things. They'll drink a drink and they'll just, wear clothes or do whatever. You can train these animals to do crazy things. Now, how many people in here have ever trained a squirrel? Anybody? Nobody's going to fess up. All right. I know many people who, I call them tree rats. I don't know, but they'll get a squirrel, and you can train it to come sit on your shoulder, eat a peanut. You can train them to go a certain place, do this or that. They're a wild animal, but if you keep working at it and keep on it, you can train them to do amazingly wonderful things. It's amazing that you can do. All right? I have, at my house, 24 chickens. And one thing I like about chickens, sometimes at church, people might not like you. Chickens always love you. And I'll walk outside and they get in the line and follow me everywhere I go, not because they like me. They remember that I fed them this morning, and their brain's so small they don't realize they have to wait till the next morning. But it's funny that you can train a chicken, you can train a dog, you can train a cat, sorta. You can train a cow, you can train a dolphin, you can train a gorilla and a chimpanzee, you can train a snake. I've seen that happen. You go through all these things, and James says you can train every one of those, but you better be careful because sometimes they're dangerous. On a farm, some of these animals, even when they're domestic, they're dangerous. You turn your back, they're dangerous. You gotta be careful. Well, how does that relate to the tongue? You've got to work every day to train your tongue in the way it needs to go. And the second you turn your back and you're not paying attention, guess what's just happened? You set one of those forest fires, and now we got to go put it out. And so, man, that's just such big stuff for us to worry about and to work with and to try to get. It's a restless evil. It's full of deadly poison. It's such a dangerous thing. Now, look at chapter 3, verses 9 through 12 there. True commitment to Christ is seen in the consistency of your language. And see, James is just rolling out with these illustrations. Imagine going up to the ocean, putting a cup down there, and somebody says, hey, you can't drink salt water. And you say, well, okay, I got my glass, but I'm only going to drink the freshwater part, and I'll leave the salt behind. Now, that's just silly, isn't it? I mean, could a person do that? No, you can't do that. Do you have desalination plants and things such as that? And you can do different chemical equations as far as that goes. But if you get salt water and fresh water, mix it together, it's not fit to drink. It's nasty. In fact, it may be more dangerous than just plain salt water. When you and I sing songs of praise in a church building and say beautiful prayers in a church building, but we go outside and have filthy language, and we go out through the week and we're gossiping and we're slandering and we're cutting people down, we're actually more dangerous than the people in the world who never spoke those good things in a church building. And James says, listen, you can't get a fig tree to give you an olive, no matter how hard you try. And that's just a basic farming principle. Whatever you plant, whatever a man sows, therefore he shall also reap. Now remember Galatians 6, what's connected there, right? God is not mocked. You're not going to make fun of God. You're not going to fool him. Whatever you do, it's going to come back to you. It's going to be planted. And so it's absolutely absurd for a Christian to not act like a Christian. So this is a Rotary International 4-way test. We may have some members who are in Rotary. They always say, notice these 4 things before you ever speak. And that's one of those things that they really push, okay? So if you have something to say, if you are about to do a lesson, a devotional, if you're about to talk to a friend, run it through these 4 filters. And each filter is a little bit lighter of a gradient, you know. You can get through one, but the second one's a little tougher, third one's a little tougher, fourth one's a little tougher. Number 1, if it's not the truth, stay away. All right? Before you talk, ask yourself, is this the truth? Well, I heard it here, or I saw it on the internet, right? What do we always put on Facebook? I hereby say that whatever the owner of Facebook is going to start charging $29.99. And I hereby say you can't use my pictures, or something. Have you ever seen those posts? And we think it's real because we saw it on the internet, right? Well, before you post something on Facebook or Snapchat, maybe some of y'all in here, ask yourself, is that stuff true? Can I verify what these things are that's being said? Am I sure that this is the truth? Now, secondly, there are some things true, but boy, they are not fair. You're taking stuff out of context. You are really stretching stuff. All right? You have probably seen some of our campaigns for governor on both sides. They're interesting, right? They, are you being fair with the facts? There's nothing wrong with pointing out stuff. But are you being fair with the facts that you're saying, that you're putting out? Think when you speak, are you taking people out of context? Are you being judgmental? Number 3, just because something is true doesn't mean you have to say it. Honey, does this dress make me look fat? Do you want to live? Right? Your preacher's not telling you to lie. Okay? What's the preacher telling you to do? Survive till next Sunday. Right? Just because it's true, don't say it. Okay? And there's other examples besides that old classic yarn, about, clothes making you look a certain way or whatever else it may be. When you speak to somebody, does it bring goodwill? Does it bring better friendship? Are there things that you would say behind someone's back that you would not say to their face? How consistent are you? Okay, number 4. Is it beneficial? Is it something that helps and aids the cause of Christ? Is it something that makes the situation better? Now, there are times where, especially this may happen in preaching more than everyday language, you can preach a sermon And it is full of truth. It is full, absolutely full of truth. You're not stretching anything anywhere. But the tone that you preach it with and the way that you preach it can run more people off than will convert. I've seen some preachers who will talk about denominations, and this is what this denomination believes, and that's what that denomination believes. And I think we need to do more of that. Too many of us are growing up thinking all churches are the same because we've never discussed denominationalism and some of those doctrines that are out there that are not found in the Bible. But sometimes when we get into that, talking about how so-and-so is wrong and how so-and-so we think hasn't read the Bible in its purity, and they've read the Bible out of context, and they've brought in tradition rather than the Word of God, sometimes the way in which we say that sure doesn't convert them. And you got to be careful. That's one of the reasons why people, a lot of times, will accuse us of saying we're the only ones going to heaven. That's why a lot of times people will say, well, you know, you think you're the only ones right. Now, do we believe that? We believe that you follow the Bible. And if you follow the Bible, Jesus will judge in a good way. But be careful that it's beneficial. Be careful that it's something that brings goodwill, that people see your love as much as they hear it. Be careful that it's fair, and be careful that it's the truth. That's the devil who's the father of liars. And so we got to be careful about that stuff, okay? Now, there's sins of the tongue. Sins of the tongue. What are some sins of the tongue? I've written down in our notes, first of all, making foolish oaths. That would be James chapter 5, verse 12. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Now, we see where Jesus made an oath. We see where Paul made an oath. It's not wrong for you to stick your hand on the Bible in court and say, I solemnly swear, to speak the truth. What Jesus is saying here is live in such a way that people don't have to take an oath from you. That people, when they hear you, know that what you say is true. Don't be the kind of person where they're looking behind to see if your fingers are crossed, or your toes are crossed, or whatever else you may do. Be a person that people will trust. Well, if he said it, I believe it because I know that person. I know his character. And so a foolish oath. Profanity, Colossians 3:8, let no coarse language, profane language come out of your mouth. Let's see. Complaining, 1 Corinthians 10. And 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 10 has always been one of those passages that kind of scare me when I read through it. Why did God punish Israel? Yeah, there's idolatry, absolutely. Yes, they didn't trust him as they went to the wilderness. 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 10 says he got tired of hearing them complain. Uh-oh. Guess what happens in church? Man, that preacher went way too long. Which, of course, we don't say that here. Man, it's too hot in here. It's too cold in here. Oh, who's bringing chili to the potluck? I'm going to eat this one or that one. Do we complain quite a bit? I ran across this quote. We are the richest and yet the most unsatisfied generation of all history. We're the richest and yet the most unsatisfied generation of all history. What would people 100 years ago think about the fact that we can push, I bet I can push 10 keystrokes in here and find just about any fact on Google that anyone's ever written? That's just neat, isn't it? And what about the fact that we can communicate all across the earth, all across the world? My dad loved amateur radio. He used to make me climb up these towers. We'd get 40 meter, 20 meter, 2 meter, all that sort of stuff. I had to climb up a 50-foot tower and figure out the length of the wire and all these sort of things. And we'd get all that together, and we could speak to somebody in Africa. And sometimes on Sunday afternoons, we speak to a missionary in Africa. And that was so cool. Now you can just do it with this. You don't have to climb up on a tower. You don't have to measure out wire to see what frequency you're sending. You can just call them right up. Imagine the blessings we have. The food, you can eat food from any ethnicity. You can have food really quick, right? All the blessings, all the material things we have, but to look at us, how happy are we? A lot of times we complain. A lot of times we're just not satisfied at all. Okay? There's another point I was going to say here, but I can't read my writing, so we'll skip that. But it's something out of James 3, 9 and 10. And so I bet it was good, though. All right, we'll skip it. Bad things out of the mouth, good things out of the mouth. What are some good things? Prayer. James will remind us the effective fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much, right? James 5:13. You can talk to the most powerful being in the universe. Just like that. And we don't emphasize prayer enough. We forget the power of prayer. Your words can move the world. Encouraging other people. James 1:17. You can lift somebody's whole world up with just some positive words. With compliments, with just checking on people who are lonely, you can change their whole world. And teaching, you can teach somebody the gospel and change their eternity. Isn't that amazing? Find somebody who's lost, you can teach them the gospel, and suddenly everything is different. It's amazing to see the power that we have. Okay? Now, what you're going to notice here, what you say and how you say it is super duper important. Our words affect eternity. Our words, according to Matthew 12, 36 and 37, are how we will be judged on the last day. Now, anytime someone hears a recording of their voice, what's the first thing that they do? They laugh. How in the world am I that country, right? A lot of times people say that, or, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I talked that way. Okay? And it is so funny because, you know, we feel like we're scholars as we speak until we listen to ourselves and we're like, oh no, you know. I never will forget, early in my preaching career, I was preaching and this girl, she was probably 5 or so. She was 7, about second grade. She came to me after the sermon. She said, look, preacher, I wrote notes. And I looked down and there was 2 Philippians. And I started to correct her. And I went back and listened to the cassette tape. That's what they had back then. Yep, 2 Philippians is just what I said, you know. And this girl was awake enough to hear it, you know. Sometimes you don't believe what comes out of the mouth, all right. But and what if on that last day there was a tape recorder and all the words you said were played out and Jesus is there? How would you feel? Oh my goodness, right? Oh my goodness. I love the passage that says, a word that's spoken wisely is like apples of gold in settings of silver. And we talked about Franklin Roosevelt. We talked about General MacArthur. We talked about John Kennedy. We talked about Ronald Reagan. These great orators. And they moved the world with the words that they said. You shape your children by what you say and how you say it. You shape this church by what you say and how you say it. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Our character is shown by our language. And the words that we say are a reflection of who we are. You ever see those people who, if they're in a restaurant or if they're in a store or whatever, there's a mirror, they will walk looking down, looking away because they just don't want to see what they look like. Kind of embarrassed about it. They don't want to look in a mirror and see themselves. You know, there's things there that they need to fix and they don't want to. That's the way our words are. Our words are not a physical reflection, but they are a character reflection of who we really are. And that's the thing. It's how we're going to change the world. It's how we change the world. You define yourself whether you're under the control of God or not. I got a puppy 2 years ago. I have a good time with her. They told me she was a German Shepherd when I got her. She's not. She's like a lab and some sort of hound, greyhound. I'm not sure how that happened. But when I picked her up from the pound, they said, you can train her. This will be the smartest dog ever. Okay? Let me just tell you, when I go home, she runs out in the yard and lays down in front of my car because she's excited. And there's a few times I've thought, Well, I started to train her. You have to sit, you have to do this. We're now at the point where she goes to the restroom outside and she doesn't eat the chicken, so we're just at a truce. Okay? You judge them, you train them to a certain point where you can survive with them. How deeply have you trained your tongue? There's some people, their tongue has not been trained at all. Is that you? Or are you somebody who has really stayed on top of it, really shown that discipline, and you can see that training which is there? All right, here's our homework. Now, listen, 3 people told me last week, or this week, they have read the book of James. That's pretty amazing right there. It's 108 verses. You can do it. And so if you have opportunity, you can knock this out 15 minutes. If you'll just give 15 minutes sometime this week, you can pull it off. And so try to read it. But listen to yourself this week. You don't have to record it. Watch the words. When you're talking to people, are you the person who's finding things to compliment? Or are you the person complaining about everybody else? Old preacher asked one time in a sermon, are you a puffer or a popper? And I thought, that's drugs, man. You puff marijuana and you pop the pills. I said, you can't preach that. But what he was talking about is people were being balloons. You're puffing them up or you're popping their balloon. And so you got to be sure how you say that. And then that 4-way test. Remember that 4-way test.